The dimly lit corners of the Shadow Realm bar had never seemed so oppressive, nor had its shadows felt so hostile. The trader, once a man of influence, moving in the hidden circles with quiet authority, was now little more than a husk, stripped bare and left with nothing but his memories and fear. Sitting alone at a small scratched table in the human side of the bar, he kept his gaze low, watching the flickering light in his empty glass. His hands trembled as he held it, knuckles white, the faint clinking of the glass against the wood betraying his nerves. He'd ordered a drink but hadn't touched it. Every sip tasted like bile, tainted by the humiliation he'd suffered and the looming spectre of vengeance he feared would find him soon. Across the bar, regular patrons laughed and traded stories, unaware of his turmoil. But to him, every voice seemed a whisper plotting against him, every glance a sign of impending danger. He hadn't slept in days, not since Kaelithra, the one he'd once betrayed, the child he'd handed over to the Demon King, stripped him of his powers and his birthright, leaving him powerless, vulnerable, and alone. In his paranoia, he thought he saw Shade's silhouette lurking in the periphery, the figure's silent, judging gaze piercing through the crowd. He blinked, trying to shake the image from his mind, but it clung to him, reminding him of the one person who had every reason to come after him for what he'd done. Shade, Kaelithra's loyal protector, would no doubt relish seeing him suffer. The shadows in the bar seemed to pulse with life, dancing mockingly around him. They curled at the edges of his vision, refusing to let him forget the treachery that had brought him to this moment. His breathing quickened as his eyes darted around, searching for anyone who might be watching him, anyone who might know. "What are you doing here, trader?" A voice from behind startled him. It was the bartender, a gruff man with a scar that ran from his cheek to his jaw, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at the once powerful figure sitting before him. The trader forced a laugh, a dry, brittle sound that barely resembled laughter. "Just resting my feet," he muttered, avoiding the bartender's gaze. The bartender scoffed, unimpressed, and moved on, leaving him to his misery. He slumped back in his chair, head pounding as he tried to steady his thoughts. He couldn't stay here forever, hiding among the shadows and hoping for a reprieve. But where could he go? Outside, the supernatural world was filled with those who would relish seeing him destroyed, and on the human side, he was nothing, just another nobody with nowhere to turn. Maybe. Black Dawn, he thought, a glimmer of hope breaking through his despair. He'd heard whispers of the group before, a shadowy faction with a reputation for dealing in the darker arts, beings who didn't ask questions about alliances or morality, but he had no idea how to contact them. And the thought of walking blindly into another pact with dark forces left him cold. As he pondered his dwindling options, he felt a strange sensation, the prickling awareness of being watched. He glanced up, his heart racing, and his gaze landed on her, Rose, leaning against the far wall, her eyes sharp and amused, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She was an enigma, one of the few who seemed to flow effortlessly between the human and supernatural sides of the bar. She knew everything that happened here, every secret, every whispered plot, every betrayal. If anyone could help him, it was her. But he knew enough about Rose to know that nothing came without a price. He swallowed, his pride a distant memory, and made his way over to her. She watched his approach with the same faintly entertained smile, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Rose," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need information." She raised an eyebrow, the smile widening just slightly. "Oh, I'm sure you do," she replied, her voice smooth and mocking. "And I'm sure it's very urgent." Her tone made it clear she knew exactly how far he'd fallen, and she savoured every second of his desperation. He clenched his fists, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I'm willing to pay," he said, though he had little left to offer. His voice cracked, revealing the panic lurking beneath the surface. Rose tilted her head, pretending to think it over. The trader, brought to begging. Oh, what a delicious sight. I must admit, I never thought I'd see the day. He grit his teeth. Do you know how to contact Black Dawn? Her expression turned thoughtful, though her eyes sparkled with wicked amusement. Maybe, she said, drawing out the word, but it'll cost you. He took a shaky breath, barely daring to hope. Name your price. She leaned in, her voice low and dangerous. I'll take one thing, that little bit of pride you have left. I want you to kneel and beg me. Humiliation flared in his chest, but he was too far gone to refuse. He lowered himself to his knees, the murmur of nearby patrons reaching his ears as they noticed the scene. The once proud trader, reduced to grovelling on the floor of the bar, his pride stripped away by the very people he'd once looked down upon. Rose laughed softly, clearly delighted. Good boy, she cooed, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Here's what I'll tell you. Black Dawn has eyes everywhere. They'll find you, if you're valuable enough. He looked up, desperation clouding his vision. How will they know I'm valuable? She shrugged, feigning indifference. That's your problem, trader. Prove your worth and maybe they'll come knocking. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him kneeling in the dust and shadows of the bar, the laughter of nearby patrons echoing in his ears. For the first time, he felt the weight of his choices, the bitter consequences of a life built on betrayal and deceit. And as he rose slowly to his feet, he realized that he was truly alone, stripped of everything he'd once relied on. But desperation has a way of breeding courage, or perhaps insanity. And as he walked back to his table, one thought kept repeating in his mind. I will find a way. I will survive this no matter the cost. In the shadows of the bar, a flicker of determination kindled in his eyes. It wasn't redemption he sought, nor forgiveness. It was power. And he would do whatever it took to regain it. The trader sat alone in the darkest corner of the Shadow Realm bar, cloaked in shadows as if he could become one with them. He'd barely stepped outside the bar since Kaelithra had stripped him of his powers. The cold, endless ache left in their place gnawed at his bones, a constant reminder of his fall. He could still feel the faint tendrils of darkness that clung to him, residual scraps from his pact with the Demon King, but without his birthright, they were weaker, unpredictable. Every time the door creaked open, he flinched, expecting to see Kaelithra's icy glare or Shade's unyielding vengeance. Paranoia seeped into his every thought. He'd sit with his back to the wall, watching every figure, reading every movement. Tonight, he was steeling himself, calculating his options when he sensed a figure approaching. Rose! She slid into the seat across from him, her expression casually curious, almost bored. Her fiery red hair glinted under the low light, casting an ominous glow on her face. The trader looked away, hoping she'd lose interest, but he knew better. Rose loved the scent of desperation. Well, well, she began, her voice like honeyed poison, the mighty traitor reduced to skulking like a frightened cat. And here I thought you had bigger ambitions. The trader shifted uncomfortably, forcing himself to meet her piercing gaze. What do you want, Rose? Rose leaned forward, her smile twisting into something sharper. It's more about what you want, I think, she said, examining her nails with casual disinterest. Isn't that why you're hiding in the bar like a worm? You need something. Or rather, someone. The trader scowled, biting back a retort. She was toying with him, savouring every moment, and he knew it. Still, she was his only chance, and she knew more about the shadows within the bar than anyone else. I need information, he admitted reluctantly, his voice barely a whisper. Someone with power, someone who can give me an edge. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, and she cocked her head, feigning surprise. Oh, information, is it? And what exactly do you have to offer in return? The trader swallowed hard. He'd expected this. Nothing came free with Rose, and the price would no doubt be steep. He fumbled for words. I can get you anything. There are still those who respect me. Rose laughed, a soft, mocking sound that echoed in the near-empty bar. Respect you? Darling, they barely tolerate your presence now. She tapped a finger to her lips, pretending to consider. But I could be persuaded. Perhaps. He gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to lash out. What do you want? Rose leaned in close, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. I want the leverage, something I can use if this little game becomes tiresome. You're going to tell me everything you know about the Demon King, about Kaelithra's powers, and how you once crawled into his favor. She smiled again, that sharp, unsettling smile. Only then might I consider helping you find your edge. The trader hesitated. Revealing the Demon King's secrets was treasonous, a betrayal he wasn't sure he'd survive. But he had little choice. With a reluctant nod, he began to speak, his voice barely above a murmur. As he shared fragments of his dealings with the Demon King, Rose listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she soaked in every detail, every lingering hint of darkness that might still cling to him. Finally, when he finished, he looked at her, waiting for her response. She tilted her head, lips curving into a smirk. That wasn't so hard, was it? She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. Now, here's a name for you. Black Dawn. The trader's eyes widened. He'd heard whispers of them, but they were elusive, powerful, and dangerous beyond measure. Rose withdrew her hand, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. They're who you're looking for. But remember, if you so much as breathe my name, I'll make sure whatever's left of you is nothing but ash. With a final mocking smile, Rose stood and strode away, leaving the trader alone, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than ever. Black Dawn. The name echoed in his mind, an invitation and a warning all in one. He didn't know what he was stepping into, but he had no other choice. And as he sat there trying to steady his hands, he couldn't shake the feeling that his nightmare had only just begun. The trader stayed slumped in his seat at the Shadow Realm bar, eyes darting to every shadow that flickered. His once proud stance was now hunched, fearful. Kaelithra's parting act had shattered him. He was powerless, a man without status or a kingdom to call his own. The trader, once proud and cunning, was now nothing more than a husk haunted by every flicker of movement in the bar. Fear lingered around every corner, each shadow seeming to hold a new threat. And that's when she slipped into view. Rose. Watching him struggle through his drink, her smirk grew as she saw the cracks in his once cocky facade. She sidled up to him, her red hair catching the dim light, and her eyes alight with that distinct glimmer of mischief. Rose didn't need powers to strike fear. She knew enough to set his world alight with terror just by being present. Well, look who's seen better days, she said, her voice a whisper laced with mockery, fingers tracing the edge of his glass. No powers, no allies, no kingdom. You're quite the sorry sight, trader. He glared, but the look lacked his former venom. Enjoying yourself? He asked, his voice trembling as he tried to hide the bitterness. Is this your idea of fun, Rose? Fun? She chuckled, drawing the word out. You've lost your touch, trader. You used to be so in control. But desperation looks good on you. She leaned closer, her gaze narrowing. The real question is, how far are you willing to go to get back some semblance of power? The trader looked away, unable to meet her eyes. I need information, he muttered. Something, anything, that can help. Rose's smile grew wider. Oh, I do have information. But you're going to pay for it, she replied smoothly. And I don't mean in coin. No, I want a favor. A real favor. Something I can call on. Anytime. Anywhere. He hesitated, her words sinking in. A favor for Rose was no light deal. The trader knew it could be his undoing, but the sting of his current state pushed him forward. After a moment, he nodded. Fine. Name it. Her eyes danced with triumph. Good choice. Now, there's a group in need of your unique talents. They're interested in supernatural power, knowledge, the kind of dark information only someone who once served the Demon King could provide. His pulse quickened as he considered her words. Black Dawn, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the bar. She nodded, her smirk widening. The very same. They'll want what you know about Kaelithra, her powers, and especially the darkness she fought against. Oh, they'll come to you. She trailed her fingers across his shoulder as she turned to leave. Or maybe you'll go crawling to them. With a final triumphant smile, she was gone. Hours later, as the trader stepped out into the chill night air, a figure cloaked in shadow approached, and without a word pressed a cold, dark card into his hand. A silver crescent marked it, barely visible in the dim glow of the bar lights. His blood ran cold as he recognized the symbol. "Welcome to the fold," a deep, echoing voice whispered. "You know the terms of our agreement. Fail, and you'll wish Kaelithra had ended you." The trader stumbled down the dark alley behind the Shadow Realm bar, clutching the small, ominous card in his trembling hand. It was all he had left. A flimsy, unsettling promise of potential power wrapped in peril. The silver crescent glowed faintly, as though mocking him, as he traced it with a shaking finger. The darkness closed in around him, suffocating and cold. Every step he took seemed to echo louder, bouncing off the narrow walls, amplifying the empty silence. Each flicker of shadow threatened to consume him. He had spent his life lurking in the shadows, but now, stripped of his powers, they felt like strangers, hostile and mocking. For the first time in years, he felt truly afraid. "Black Dawn," he whispered, trying to muster the courage to face whatever lay ahead. He had no choice. Rose's voice still echoed in his mind, dripping with that signature mixture of contempt and amusement. He could practically feel her watching, reveling in his misery. This was her game, he knew, and he was the desperate pawn. But he couldn't let her see him break. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the edge of the alley, where a dimly lit warehouse loomed. Its walls were cracked and covered in grime, with boarded windows and a heavy metal door that bore deep, jagged scratches. The building reeked of neglect, but he knew better. Appearances were deceiving in his world. The trader took a deep breath, steeling himself. He knocked 3 times, each one echoing down the empty street. A slot in the door slid open, revealing 2 cold, predatory eyes peering out. They studied him with a calculated intensity, taking in every inch of his worn, pitiful state. "What's your business?" the voice behind the eyes demanded, gruff and low. I have information," he replied, his voice wavering but desperate. "Information you want. About Kaelithra, the last princess of Nythoria." There was a pause, and he felt those eyes narrow. For a heartbeat, he thought they might turn him away, that his gamble had failed. But then, with a metallic scrape, the door swung open, and a figure motioned him inside. The trader hesitated, looking over his shoulder one last time at the open street behind him. He could feel the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him, but he was too far gone to turn back now. Swallowing his fear, he stepped over the threshold. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense and something darker, something acrid and bitter. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting in strange shapes, as though the darkness itself was alive. A dozen figures in hooded cloaks lined the room, their faces hidden but their gazes unyielding, each one studying him with silent judgment. In the center of the room, seated on a throne-like chair draped in crimson cloth, was a figure who exuded an air of cold authority. The trader couldn't see the face beneath the hood, but he could feel the intensity of the gaze that settled on him. "So," the figure drawled, the voice smooth but dangerous, "you are the one they called the trader, and now you come crawling to Black Dawn. A broken shell. How? Poetic. The trader clenched his fists, willing himself not to crumble. I may be broken, but I still have worth, he said, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. I can give you knowledge, things no one else could know, secrets about the Demon King's darkness and the power Kaelithra holds. The leader leaned forward, the hood shifting just enough for him to see a glimpse of a scarred, twisted smile. You think you can bargain with us, after what you've lost? The trader felt his throat tighten. They knew. Of course they did. Rose had likely spread word of his disgrace far and wide, but he pushed on, knowing this was his only chance. I know where her weaknesses lie. I was once her guardian, entrusted by her parents. I know the ancient powers that bind her realm. The figure let out a low chuckle. Yes, the fallen protector, turned betrayer. How fitting that you come to us now. The leader rose slowly, moving closer until the trader could feel the icy chill radiating from beneath the cloak. Tell me, trader, what are you truly willing to give? He swallowed hard, feeling a bead of cold sweat trickle down his spine. Whatever it takes, he whispered. Just give me a chance to regain what I've lost. Ah, the leader mused, voice barely more than a whisper. So desperate, so weak. A hand reached out, fingers tipped with metal claws, pressing against the trader's forehead. Then I will grant you a taste of power, but know this, once you start down this path, there is no return. You will become ours, bound to our will, fail us, and your end will be unpleasant. A shiver ran through him, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he forced himself to meet that shadowed gaze and nodded, sealing his fate. The figure's hand pressed harder and a surge of dark energy shot through him. Pain ripped through his body, searing and unrelenting, but he bit back the scream. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. When it was over, he collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. The dark energy pulsed within him, colder and sharper than anything he'd ever felt. A twisted echo of the powers he'd once wielded. It was a mere shadow of what he'd known before, but it was something. And it was enough. Welcome to Black Dawn, the leader intoned, a satisfied gleam in those hidden eyes. Now go, trader. Prove your loyalty, and perhaps you may rise again. As the trader stumbled out into the night, his mind raced with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. He was no longer powerless. He had allies. Dangerous, dark allies who would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. And he, the broken man he'd become, would do anything to ensure he never felt weak again. For now, he had a purpose.
Well, you found your way to the end, haven't you? That must mean you're curious, and we love curiosity around here. Before you vanish into the ether, take a moment to subscribe. It's just a click, and trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop for what comes next. And while you're at it, give the video a like. The energy exchange is good for you. Hit that notification bell too. You wouldn't want to miss out on any of our magical misadventures. Who knows what I might conjure up next? Alright, off you go. But remember, I'll know if you didn't subscribe. See you on the other side.